Oh my gosh, we're live now. I can't swear and I have to be serious.
Yes, you do.
So, Tom Adams, unfortunately, has known me for how many years? Do you remember, Tom?
I think we're probably in the 21, 22, 23 year range, I think.
20 years.
Yep.
20 years. And I have gotten older looking, and you have remained young and handsome.
I would beg to differ, but I think what we've both done is put on I've put on way more gray hair than you have. You somehow have avoided the gray hair issue. I continue to get it. So,
Well, you put on gray hair. I just put on weight.
Right, right. Well, we've got that going too.
So, you are kind enough to always invite people on from the RIM space, document destruction, etc., and talk to them about a lot of really cool topics. And I thought the last time I saw, I think it was Jenny Gift
Yep.
that you had interviewed and chatted with. And I said, somebody's got to invite Tom on their thing and give Tom an opportunity to talk about Tom. I think that's important, right?
Yeah, it's dangerous though. That's the challenge.
We're entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are dangerous, right?
I know we are.
So
we're a dangerous group.
Let's start with someplace really kind of high level.
Okay.
And what is the why of Tom Adams?
The why of Tom Adams, I think at its basic heart would be I want people to flourish. 20 years ago, literally earlier this month, I founded my company, Flourish Press Inc., with the express intent of building a publishing company that supported people who were helping other people flourish to publish their material. That publishing part of my life really never materialized the way I had anticipated it, but it was still the heartbeat of what, to me, drives everything I do every day, all the time, which is there a way that I can use my life, my experience, my insights, the stuff I've learned, the failure, the frustration, to help somebody else flourish or thrive? And thrive. And how can I be a catalyst, a support, a light post, a sign to help people with that experience in their life when they've hit an obstacle, they're at a place where they're trying to figure stuff out. I just always have felt like that was my role. And weirdly, I can picture that way back to when I was in third grade. And in third grade, I remember knowing somehow that was my job, was to help other people who couldn't figure stuff or who were struggling with something. And at that point, it was a new kid that came into our class and didn't have any friends. And I went, it's my job to help this person flourish in this class. And I don't know where I got that from. I don't know what the origin story of that sort of fundamental belief in me or my why, but that has persisted as my why for now going on almost 60 years.
So it's interesting that you say it, because it really is the helper syndrome.
Yeah.
Is what that is, right?
Yeah.
And the helper syndrome comes from either what was role modeled for you with parents, family, and friends.
Yep.
It can come from trauma that someone experienced, but there's some particular activity or pivot point in your own life that kind of makes that spark off, right? I often say to people, I've done the things that I've done, and I'm as inquisitive as I am because growing up as a kid, I was never allowed to ask the question of why.
Right. Yeah.
I couldn't ask, why does my bicycle chain pop off? Or because my dad would get all bent out of shape, God rest his soul. But that was the reality. So then growing up and getting out of the house, I no longer had that confine of don't ask that question. Now it got to the point where it was why about everything. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was also the impetus for entrepreneurship, because I would get these jobs and people would give you these goofy jobs or these goofy rules.
Right.
And the very first words that would come out of my mouth, like, why do you have to do it that way?
Right.
Well, because we've always done it that way.
Right.
And that drives me completely, totally out of my mind. So I think we all have those moments in our life as a kid or what have you that creates it. And you, as a helper, it's interesting because I think we're probably close in age. And as we grew up through the 80s and the 90s, which became very self-serving, narcissistic times, to continue to be that helper, to continue to want to watch people flourish and then do very well in life, I think that speaks to your character. So how do you maintain that? Because that's a big energy draw on a person, right? I mean, when you talk about being a helper and wanting to do that for people, you're giving up a lot of energy to do that. So how do you keep that rolling for yourself? How do you maintain that momentum?
Yeah, I think maybe three different elements. The first is I'm always feeding the tank, right? So there is a perpetual, if you happen to come into my life and follow me around for the day, there is a persistent stack of maybe 5 to 10 books on my night table. There is a consistent set of books being consumed on my phone through Audible. There is a perpetual group of people that I surround myself with that are always putting into me and feeding my tank. So I work really hard behind the scenes that nobody sees and making sure the tank's full.
Okay.
So that's number one. I think number two is I don't feel like I'm always the one giving in the situation. I feel like that's a predisposition with the premise that I want to help people flourish and thrive. But what I also understand intuitively at the underbelly of this is that we don't do that in solitude. There is always a network effect, and I think a lot about how trees function in forests, and what we see is these trees standing alone. But what we know from studying science is underneath the ground they're all interconnected.
Sure.
And I think a lot of times for me, it's that the work I do with people is also the work that is doing something to me. So it never always feels like this is just me giving. It's me in a place of receiving in this coordinated effort with somebody else. And I don't feel like somehow I've magically figured this out. My role that I primarily play is an executive coach, advisor, thinking partner, someone that has intimate conversations with people to help them with their world, their life, their business. But in that, a lot of times what I feel like is the places that I'm talking to them, I might be in fourth grade and they're in third, but I don't feel like I'm the university professor.
Right.
I am particularly suited in my predisposition, the way I think, the way my brain operates, to accompany people. And I just happen to be down the road sometimes that they're not comfortable in. Most of my clients are extraordinarily comfortable in business, but sometimes what they're not necessarily comfortable in is questioning their own thinking, questioning their own predispositions or presuppositions or the way they look at the world. And my job a lot of times is to be the person in their world that's questioning the way they think, because frankly, that's what I do a lot. I spend a lot of my time questioning my own self because I don't feel like I've got it figured out. So borrowing that phrase from Zen traditions or Buddhist traditions is I live in beginner's mind almost all the time. And so for me, a lot of times I don't feel like it's this tank that's emptying, although I use part of one of my three pillars is keep filling the tank. But I don't feel like my tank is always being emptied. I feel like I exist with a whole bunch of capabilities and history and experiences and knowledge that allows me to step into situations that brings the best of myself, that brings a passionate area. Probably not unlike you, Joe. I mean, you walk into a prison and work with people that want to change their life, and it's not draining to you. I know there's difficulty with it, and I know there's emotional, you spend emotionally to do that, but man, it fills my tank. I love what I do. I love, if I get off a call and I'm not feeling better, it's rare. It's generally a really good, it's a rare experience that I go, oh, I'm drained. I'm energized by what I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point to make, because I've spent time in both men and women's prisons and now locally in a county jail. And I learn as much from people that are incarcerated
Yes.
as I think that they probably learned from me, and
Yeah.
sometimes more.
Yeah.
And their giving nature is pretty incredible,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
when you think about the helping syndrome, Tom, the third grader helper guy,
Yeah.
how hard is it for you to ask for help?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I've had to learn that over the years. And I think you said it earlier, coming out of our histories, we have our own experiences. And I think one of the things that I have really amplified in my life, again, hidden to the average person, unless you have an intimate knowledge and relationship with me, you don't hear this. But I have spent an inordinate amount of money on therapy, counseling, coaching. I eat my own dog food and I pay coaches to coach me. I'm involved in groups that support me. I know you and Angie do the same thing in your worlds, like in terms of you're involved in groups that are supportive of the kind of business you're in, the kind of roles you play, and you engage in those. And I invest a lot in people to help me question my own thinking, to give me perspective, to give me a way of thinking about things. Um, I think probably so. I feel like professionally, I feel like I do a good job of it. Probably the place that I'm weaker at it is kind of the stuff that I suck at anyways, which is stuff around the house. And I don't know, there's some weird thing that comes out of the historical DNA that I have, which is somehow you should be able to have gardening figured out, and the lawn, and how to fix stuff. And frankly, I don't. I don't have a green thumb. I've got a black thumb. And so I feel like in some of those ways, I feel like I've had to learn. And now approaching 60, I feel like, okay, I've realized I'm not all I thought I was.
Right.
I'm not, I think coming out at 30 and 35, I somehow thought I had everything figured out. And
Mhm.
every progressive year reminds me I've got less figured out. So I don't know. I I know I've still got ego, but frankly, I think my ego has been beaten up enough over the years with failure and frustration and heartache and all of that kind of stuff, and then a near-death experience with my own personal cancer journey that made me go, just ask for help, man. Ask for
Mhm.
help.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I lost both of my parents in 2020. My dad was only a few days shy of 95, and my mother a few days shy of 93. So they lived a very long and productive life.
Yeah.
Um, but after that, people had said to me, you seem calmer, you
Mm,
seem less tense, you seem different. And I think to your point, my obviously near death experience was with both of my parents. And I think what it does is you wake up and you realize what's important
yeah.
and what's garbage.
Yeah.
And really, there's a lot more garbage than what's necessarily important. And if you focus on those
Yeah.
two, three, or four things, like that's the guidepost, that's the value, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I mentioned to you before we got on the call together about a friend of mine from Harrisonburg, Virginia, and he had mentioned during our lunch conversation this whole idea of purpose-driven mission.
Mm,
And if you were to explain Tom Adams' purpose-driven mission, what and I get the flourish part,
yep.
etc.
Yep.
But when you get into the deep dive details of that, what is that to me? How would you explain your purpose-driven mission to me?
Yeah. Well, I think the way that I have worked it for myself, and this literally sits in a document that I review almost weekly, which is my and it comes from sort of a corporate structure. What's my vision, and then what's my mission or guiding purpose is to help people thrive and flourish. But my mission is through my own curiosities, through my own sense of fascinations and more. I seek out wisdom and knowledge that first and foremost I have to practice, I have to make sense of, I have to live it out in my life so it makes sense, and then from there, I want to share it with people that are somehow have become part of my orbit. I want to give it away. Like, so much of my life as a giver is also giving it away. I don't want to hoard this information. And, you know, you've watched me over the years do that. I stand up. I haven't missed a NADE or I Sigma or Prism conference, which was the previous version of the two of them combined. I haven't missed one for like 22 years. I've spoken at every one. And part of it for me is I feel like I'm always on this journey to learn stuff, then to test it, to experiment with it. And then from there to go, how do I share this with people? Because I don't know, there's something for me that I've realized that is that when I hoard it, it doesn't work, but when I give it away, it seems to. And so literally my, you know, if you're looking for my personal mission, I want to be a seeker of really cool things and then share them. I literally want to know myself. I realize that's the hardest thing to do, which is figure myself out, because in figuring myself out, I now have walked a journey that I can help people with. And then I've got this weird thing that's shown up in the last, you know, maybe the last 5 years, which is there's this premise in me that I want to be the village elder.
I love it.
And that,
that's,
you know,
cool.
and I don't share that with a lot of people, but here I am doing it publicly. But in my head, I go, there was always in smaller worlds, not when we live in this kind of this digital world, but in smaller communities, there was always somebody in the community that you could go, I need to go talk to him or her.
Yes.
And you know, I feel like part of it for me is if I'm if my purpose is to figure shit out, once I figure that out and then I practice it in my life, then if somebody comes to me and says, hey, how do I process this? I go, you know, what about this? And have you considered this? And what's going on in your life that leads you to ask that question of me, or whatever the shape of that takes? That's literally how I think about doing it. And I do that through coaching, which is a primary function of mine. I do that through speaking. I do that through writing. I do that through trying to have podcasts with people that I find interesting, both within an industry that you and I both know really well, and then this other world that I live in, which is the advisory board space. I do it through, I've written books and I see more in my future. But those are the kind of things that really are the essence of how I deliver that mission in the world.
First of all, I think it's pretty cool. And I would consider you to be a village elder. I like that. I would come to you, and I have in the past.
Yeah.
There's an interesting book called The Blue Zones. And then there's a docuseries on Netflix, and it talks about zones around the world that have a higher concentration of centenarians, meaning those people that are 100 years or older, than other places on the planet, right? And one of the things that you find in those areas of centenarians is a real reverence for older experience and knowledge.
Yes.
The connection that it has to family, and then what those relationships mean and how revered they are by younger folks.
Yes.
And when you were talking about that, I had thought about that book and that docuseries. It's pretty interesting. Plus, there's a lot of really great recipes and great red wine. So all of which I think are a great combination, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things, Angie and I were in Savannah, Georgia last week for a conference. She was foolish enough to let me drag her along so she could speak, but she did a great job. And
she's a rock star.
She is a rock star, and I don't give her enough credit.
No, she's a rock star.
I should probably do a better job. I probably will, but you know, I don't want her head to get too big.
Right.
But we talked about this whole idea of where we are with American business today. And, you know, there is this, and has been seemingly since the 1980s, this philosophy and belief of acquiring wealth, influence, and power. And I have no issue with that. Like that doesn't bother me. But what's interesting is that it has been the accumulation of wealth, power, and influence for the sake of those things, and not what it seemed to have been 100 years ago when we think of somebody like Andrew Carnegie and what he did with his own wealth in Pittsburgh. Now, don't get me wrong, we had some issues in steel plants. We kind of like wiped out the environment a little bit, et cetera, and so forth. But there was a reality very similar to Milton Hershey, why Hershey Park was built. It was built for the employees. Why they changed their work schedule in the summertime because it was so hot. And then why they built the Milton Hershey School for Children. So what I wonder, from your perspective, when we take a look today at this accumulation of wealth, power, and influence, is there a way that we can do that in such a way where we actually solve problems, whether they're small and insignificant to other people, or perhaps you're talking about large societal problems? I'm wondering from your perspective what you think about that.
Yeah, I think it's a complex question that I think sometimes we attempt to answer simply. So I start with that premise. I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, I get the sense that we're more the average entrepreneur that I intersect with and work with as a coach or advisor. The wealth is the one that drives it, right? That's the driver.
Sure.
And so I think if you go to Washington or you're in political circles, power tends to drive that equation. And if you're in the social media spheres, then influence tends to drive it. And it's not that they don't overlap, and there's sort of their own layers of interlap, but the one that I tend to see most often is this sort of relentless focus on accumulation of wealth for wealth's sake. And my sense is it at a certain point becomes a bottomless pit, is you can't ever get enough of what you don't really need.
Right.
And we all, I think there's this weird thing that happens in entrepreneurs is that there is a hunger that develops to accomplish something, and then the system, starts to go into, I need more of the same, and I need more and more and more. Nothing, that's not a judgment of it. It's just that sometimes what I sense is that the more is not to accumulate, it's to fill a void or a hole somewhere.
Right. Yes.
There's this hole that we're constantly filling. So that to me is the first thing I see. Then out of that, it's, well, if you're going to switch and if you're going to make a shift in that, if I have accumulated and if I have the capacity to accumulate, and one of the cool things about entrepreneurs is we have the capacity to accumulate wealth in a way that non-entrepreneurs don't. If you're you're simply, unless you're in a multinational corporation and you sit in the C-suite, it's really hard to create wealth other than being an entrepreneur. And so I think from that perspective, then it's do you really know what you're trying to accomplish with your life? One of the questions I start every single of my coaching relationships with, I actually asked 3, but this fundamental question is, if you knew you had 5 to 10 years to live, how would you change your life? And I've had my own experience with a close proximity to death, with a major cancer journey that I took, and realized that once you ask that question, you start to go, well, what do I really want my life to mean here? And I think a lot of times in that sort of relentless pursuit of wealth and accumulation, we don't stop and say, well, if I'm dying, what do I want? Is there some kind of mark that I want to leave on this place? And I'm not even sure the mark is that great, but it switches something in us to go, well, what is that thing? And I think sometimes the starting point is, if I could do something and if I were near the end, how would I like to leave a legacy of some kind or another, even if it's just that I helped one person? And so I think in some respects, I sometimes come at it maybe differently than you're asking the question, but I sometimes come at it as, well, what do you want your life to mean? Like what's the whole point of you showing up in this planet? Why are you here? And what are you going to leave that makes this place better than when you left? And a lot of times entrepreneurs talk that language in terms of we hire staff and we want them to leave a client in better shape when we've encountered them. We serve them and they're better for it. Well, a lot of times we're not doing that with our lives. So I feel like,
Right.
and I'm going to shut up because I feel like I'm just waxing eloquent here on
Doing great.
But I feel like in that is something that sets up where you go with it. And I've watched you over the years live from a perspective of building a business, working hard to build this business. And then all of a sudden Joe goes and jumps into, it feels like, there's this, the work you're doing in prison, but I feel like there all of a sudden emerged Joe that was like really out there helping other people, involved not just in the prison related stuff, but I feel like you're teaching college courses and you're like, there's all this layer of other stuff that's come, but it came from not just creating wealth for yourself, but getting to a point where you went, I'm doing something that matters.
Well, I think you're spot on, right? I've had a number of different things happen in my life that have made me personally sit back and say, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And why am I doing it that way? Whether it was, a divorce or the loss of my parents or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
And so now it's about having a desire to add value to people's lives. When we start off, when we do prison work, one of the very first things we ask people is, okay, what do you want to be known for? What do you want to create as an impact when you get out? And also, what are the 3 to 5 things that you're going to do differently that keeps you from ever coming back here again?
Mm-hmm.
I think to your earlier point, what's interesting about business is, so we can learn accounting, finance, marketing, management, strategy, right?
Yep.
If we go into any other domain, we can learn about marketing, we can learn about English, we can learn about history. No one gets a BA or a BS or an advanced degree in this thing called life.
Right. Yeah.
So depending upon where you come from, there's never that time to really be introspective.
Yeah.
And to sit down and have those kind of conversations. And they're not philosophical necessarily, but it's really about developing your perspective. And, to me, it's about, again, how do you add value? How do you make it better for other people? I think we both probably share this belief that we have very blessed lives.
Oh, extraordinary. Yes.
Get to run a company. I've got a great family. I've got good health. I get to help people. I'm on national boards, a lot of stuff, not to brag, but that's the blessing that I have in my life.
Yeah.
And so I think that we all have a responsibility at some point in time to then turn around and say, okay, what are we going to do for the next person in the line? Because I didn't get here, nor did you, by simply showing up, right?
No.
And so I think that's that whole, okay, now that you can accumulate all this stuff, do something of value with it that really benefits some other human.
Yeah. And I think the dilemma that sometimes I see, especially if you're in that zone of just running wildly after this bigger thing, that there is often not a lot of, you don't give yourself a lot of permission, and you don't build a lot of muscle around the introspective approach to life. And I think there is this phase in life where life decides that it's going to tell you, and some of us call it midlife and others of us call it massive failure and others call it whatever. But there's this point in life where I feel like you run into the wall and you go, this thing that I thought was filling my tank is no longer filling my tank. And it's not that I can't leverage it, use it, make it a valuable part, but I don't know. Carl Jung talked about Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, talked about the fact that the things that get you to the midpoint of life are not the things you need for the next half. And and so there's something, and for some strange, interesting reason, in my practice of coaching, most of my clients aren't under 45. Most of them are over, right? I've got very few clients under 45, and the ones who are under have hit some major roadblock in their life where they're already, it's like they're slightly more mature than their age sometimes, but there's this place where you hit, and I don't primarily live just as a coach. I'm not the best business mind in the world, but my work is often intersecting this person that is me and how I infect my own business. Right. So a major premise I bring into every conversation is most of my business problems are as a CEO, owner, entrepreneur, are mostly my personal problems in disguise that kind of show up in the guise of a business problem.
Oh, for sure.
And that's hard that's hard work when you get there, when you go, oh, my business is a mess and I've built this really cool company and yet something's not working in it. And a lot of times that to me is, we hit this place where now we're confronted with our own amortality. We've got less life in us than we used to have. We're facing a sense internally that what we're doing doesn't actually solve this inner hole that I seem to be holding, that putting more cash in there doesn't necessarily fill it, or putting more houses onto the asset list. They're all, nothing wrong with them, but they don't fill that void. And so I think what you're talking about and what we're talking about is, how then do you adjust yourself to go, I'm going to take this life, this experience, this capability, this wealth, and leverage it to get a result for somebody else, to give it away, and to give it away in such a way that somebody else benefits from this cool thing that I've done for myself.
Yeah, and I think that's a normal, natural gift that we should be prepared to do and not be selfish with it. Because neither one of us got to where we are by not having people that were in the front of the line that pulled us forward. Now we had to do the legwork and the grunt work and all that kind of jazz, but at the end of the day, there was a village elder.
Yes.
When you were a young man, right?
100%.
So
many of them. Yes.
Yep. Oh yeah. And I think that, when you start talking about, what's somebody's why and being purpose driven with your mission, and now this whole idea of how you take these things and solve some of the problems, it's not philosophical to think that we can solve the problems. It's a matter of being able to figure it out and taking action, and then testing things and pivoting and just testing them and pivoting, etc. So,
yeah. Well, and I have to say, I've, from somewhat of a distance, watched you continue to do that, and am really impressed with what you're bringing to the world. I mean, the farm thing, I feel like even that evolution in the last year is really profound. I'm a farm kid. I grew up on the farm. And I watch that and how that intersects, and I feel like that's an ongoing evolution of your decision to make a difference in people's lives. And that has evolved not from where you started it, but you've kind of moved forward and tested things, and then for some reason that has found something, a groove for you, or a resonance that now works for you. And
it does. And, and Farming to Freedom, at least right now, is really a metaphor for being able to give men and women the opportunity to farm for opportunities.
Yeah.
And those opportunities are around second chances and living in the free world and doing something better for themselves. At some point in time, and my wife thinks I'm totally crazy, which I probably am, would love to own a farm that has the ability to house whatever number of people, called a transition place of life. It's a working farm where people can go and really get the job training and skills that they need before they go out into the real world. Because what we know to be true is this: when people, it doesn't matter what country you're in, the two biggest challenges that men and women face when they come out of jail is, how do I get a job?
Yeah.
And where do I live?
Right.
And when we can't do those things, regardless of how you feel about crime and sentencing, when we can't do those things, we cause prison recidivism to continue.
Right. Yeah. So. But for me, that's and you fully explained the thing that you're doing. But for me, what preceded that was that you have had this belief in you about giving back, and that continues to evolve to a place that fully aligns with something in you that feels like it's going to make a significant impact versus just giving back for the sake of giving back. And
Sure.
I right, that like it's you, what I've seen you do is amplify, and little by little, as you adjust and learn and figure something out, like you've amplified the impact based on actually a deep commitment to the cause. And how you explained it is that deeper commitment to this cause and a way to solve things. But that's not where you started. That's where you're now. Like, that's the cool part about once you make that flip, and I am actually going to give back out of this wealth, out of this benefit that I've received being an entrepreneur. I'm now going to shift it and evolve it. And now you're to this place where really cool things are starting to emerge, even as they're beginning.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that observation. And, part of it is also what Angie and I did for the last 22 years with Reclamere.
Yes.
That business was the experiment from day one.
Yes.
And, if we tried to do what we did back in the day, we wouldn't be a business.
Right.
The work that she did with NAID back in the day, and I'm talking about 2002, right. 2003.
Right.
And all of those pivots and changes we made. And although Farming to Freedom is about what are we going to do for men and women that were previously incarcerated, Reclamere was, what are we going to do with a business model that is going to add value to employees' lives? It's going to add value to our clients' lives, and ultimately allow Angie and I to have a lifestyle that lets us do that next thing.
Yes.
And so her own volunteer work that she's now able to do and financially support because of Reclamere.
Right.
And what I can do with Farming to Freedom because of Reclamere.
Right.
So it's interesting how they kind of parallel one another.
Well, yeah, and I think they feed off each other, and the lessons learned produce the result that allows you to go into it, but you're still taking all of that wisdom and knowledge and capability and creativity that you've had to learn to make a business work to go into this next iteration or this additional iteration that's more giving back. But to me, you've been giving back the whole time. It's just a different forum, and I just think it's really cool what, specifically watching you, and I know Angie has her own thing, but I'm talking to you. I think what you're doing is extraordinarily cool, and I really, I really applaud you for the work you're doing, and thank you on behalf of all the people that are somehow touched from just you showing up in the world. So,
well, I appreciate that, Tom. So in closing, I want to say thank you. I appreciate our friendship.
Yes.
And your willingness to see what happens when we chat. And if you could leave folks with anything to think about as it pertains to the why of Tom or anything else, and even if it's a question to get them thinking, what would that be?
Yes. I have two, and they're connected, but they're different. So the first one is, and it's a statement, which is quit running wildly in a direction that you don't want to go.
It's great.
And I say that because so many people that I meet have somehow adopted, without even realizing it, an outcome. And sometimes it relates to their relentless accumulation of wealth or power or fame or whatever that is. But they're running wildly towards this thing that when you actually ask them what do they want, they don't want what they're running towards, right? There's this sense in them that there's this pull or push to get this thing. But when it comes right down to it, they don't really want it. So it's so just live with that question. Am I running towards something that I don't really want?
Okay.
And that's the first statement. The second is a question that has I dramatically reshaped my life. It's not my question, but it's such a powerful question that I think it has transformed me. And it's a question that every conversation I'm in with every entrepreneur that I coach is part and parcel of the conversation, which is, how am I complicit in getting the conditions I say I don't want?
Wow.
How am I complicit, not necessarily responsible or not necessarily, but how am I complicit in getting the things that I say I don't want? I don't want X, but a lot of times, if I don't want X, we tend to, as entrepreneurs, think that somebody else is the one responsible for that. Because, I mean, we have our own predispositions about our amazingness. But a lot of times we don't ever ask the question, how am I complicit in getting this messy situation that I'm in? And then related to that, well, how does it serve me by getting these conditions I say I don't want? What's it doing for me? And a lot of times those are, they're nasty questions, because I look at my own life and I look at my own business and I go, I hate that part. And then I go, well, I mean, how are you complicit? And I go, I'm complicit all over the place. I set it up. A lot of us entrepreneurs, we're great at putting out fires, but we're the arsonists. Like, we're the ones setting fires all over the place. Right?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And we go, oh man, I'm so good at putting out fires. But then we go, I hate putting out fires. I hate all of the running around I have to do to put out all these fires. And then the question is, how are you complicit in creating all these fires?
Right.
Well, I'm complicit because I'm setting them all the time. I get these harebrained ideas and I go down the rabbit hole and I don't really understand what's coming. And I've got all these bunnies that are lying around dead because I started things and I brought them to life, and now they sit as carcasses along the sides of my business and life because I had the idea and I birthed them, but I didn't really want them. Right. So I get frustrated with all that, but then I realize I'm the one doing it. So the question is, how are you complicit? How are you complicit in getting the things you say you don't want? I hate the question, and yet it's one of the most powerful questions that's ever been put on my plate. And I ask it daily of myself and my clients, and I ask it of you if you're listening today. How are you complicit in getting those conditions in your life that you say you don't want? And my guess is you're way more complicit than you believe. And if you need
I can tell you that I'm going to borrow the question, not steal, but borrow.
Please, it's not mine.
For tomorrow when I go into prison, because that's a great question, especially in that environment.
It's powerful. It's one of the most powerful questions I've ever come across, and it so resonates in me now that I can't continue in a lot of the stuff I do without asking it, which is, I had this old therapist, and I know I keep going on, but this is so good. I had this old therapist, and it relates, many years ago, and he looked like a little bit like Yoda. He was a little guy, and he would sit there and he would push his fingers together like this, and he'd say, and I would go, and I was in my mid 30s, so I still felt like I was the only one who had my stuff together and everybody else was screwed up. and he would say, Tom, every time you hit a wall, it's a mirror. And I hated him for that. Every time you hit a wall, it's a mirror. And I go, and it took me to be almost 60 to realize, how am I complicit? Well, the wall is a mirror. This thing that I don't want in my life, I'm complicit in actually delivering it. And so it's a hard question, but it's a profound one. And if you actually give yourself time to process it, my gosh, it can do really good work on you.
Tom, I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Don't go anywhere, because we're going to chat, even though we're going to end the broadcast. Thanks, buddy.
All right, brother. It was a pleasure. Nice talking to you.